All right, let's dive into a topic that is a huge part of your patients' lives, but let's be honest, it's often a bit of a blind spot in our clinical training: herbal medicine and dietary supplements. And this isn't some niche interest, it's a mainstream reality. Understanding this world is absolutely critical for patient safety.
So let me ask you something right off the bat. In your practice, or maybe in the clinics you're rotating through, what percentage of your adult patients do you think are using at least one dietary supplement? Just take a guess. Is it like a handful, maybe a quarter of them?
Well, believe it or not, according to the 2018 National Health and Nutrition Examination Survey, the answer is a whopping 56%. Yeah, more than half. This isn't a fringe activity at all. For a lot of people, it's the norm. And that right there is why we've got to talk about this. Okay, so let's get into our first section here, your patient's secret. Because, and this is the crazy part, even though more than half of them are using supplements, a huge chunk of them will never tell you, unless you ask. So why are they taking them in the first place? Well, you'll see patients turning to supplements for these really persistent chronic conditions where conventional medicine might not have a quick fix. Things like arthritis or that feeling of just being tired all the time. They're looking for hope, really. And there's this pervasive idea that if something is natural, it's got to be safe, right? That belief sometimes makes them hesitant to even bring it up with their doctor. And this brings us to the absolute million-dollar question for any clinician. If these products are everywhere, how exactly are they regulated? This, my friends, is where things get really, really interesting and a little bit scary.
To really get what's happening now, you have to rewind a bit. Back in 1962, a law came out that said drugs had to be proven both safe and effective. That was huge, and it basically pushed most herbs into this much less regulated food supplement category. Then, fast forward to 1994, and a landmark act comes along that just completely rewrote the rulebook. That act was the Dietary Supplement Health and Education Act, or DSHEA, as you'll hear it called. It carved out this special category for supplements, totally separate from food and drugs. And here's the absolute kicker. DSHEA completely flipped the burden of proof. So instead of a manufacturer having to prove their product is safe before it hits the market, now the FDA has to prove a product is unsafe to get it taken off the shelves. A huge, huge difference. I mean, just look at this side by side. It's night and day. Drugs need pre-market approval. Supplements? Nope. Drugs can say they treat a disease. Supplements can only make these vague structure-function claims like supports a healthy immune system. And this last one is critical. For drugs, reporting bad side effects is mandatory. For supplement manufacturers, it's not. The regulatory gap is just massive. So, with a regulation gap that big, what are the actual real-world consequences? It brings up a very basic, very important question. What's actually in that bottle your patient is holding?
Okay, get ready for this. One study used DNA barcoding to test a bunch of herbal products off the shelf, and what they found was just wild. Nearly a third, 32% of the products they tested contained a completely different plant than what was on the label. The main ingredient just wasn't there. And it's not just about getting the wrong plant, it's also about getting the right plant, but in a totally unpredictable dose. This study on ginseng is the perfect example. The amount of the active compound was literally all over the map, from 0, nothing at all, to more than 3 times the amount listed on the label. How on earth are you supposed to counsel a patient on safety or effectiveness with that kind of chaos? You just can't. And then it gets even worse. Sometimes it's not just other plants contaminating the bottle. It's straight up undeclared potent pharmaceuticals. I'm talking about finding sildenafil, yep, Viagra, in so-called natural male enhancement pills, anabolic steroids in muscle builders, even prescription drugs that were pulled from the market for being dangerous, like sibutramine. And that's not even getting into the heavy metals like lead and mercury that can pop up. So, with all these quality control nightmares, what does the evidence actually say about safety and efficacy? Let's talk about what happens when a product gets really popular and we move from just anecdotes to actual data. Let's use a classic cautionary tale, the case of ephedra. You might remember this. Back in the late 90s, early 2000s, this stuff was everywhere. It was marketed as this miracle for weight loss and athletic performance. It was the go-to supplement if you wanted to drop a few pounds or get an edge at the gym. But here's the terrifying reality. In 2001, ephedra products made up less than 1% of all dietary supplement sales, a tiny sliver of the market. but they were responsible for 64%, almost two-thirds, of all herb-related adverse events reported to poison control centers. Let that sink in. A tiny fraction of the products were causing the vast majority of the harm.
And we're not talking about mild upset stomachs here. The harm was severe: heart attacks, strokes, seizures. It took years, but the evidence became so overwhelming that the FDA finally had to step in and ban the sale of these supplements in 2004. It's just a powerful lesson in how a really popular supplement can have a very, very dangerous dark side. Okay, besides the direct effects, you have to be super vigilant about herb-drug interactions. Here are two high-yield ones you will absolutely encounter. St. John's wort is a classic. It's a powerful inducer of the CYP3A4 enzyme. That means it can make crucial drugs like antiretrovirals or transplant meds basically stop working. Then you have ginkgo biloba. It has antiplatelet effects, which sounds fine. But if you combine it with warfarin or even just aspirin, you dramatically increase the risk of a serious bleed. These are must-knows.
So I know what you're thinking. This is a lot. It's complex, it's unregulated. How do you deal with all this in a busy clinic when you barely have 5 minutes with a patient? Well, that brings us to our final and most practical section, the 5-minute consult. The single most important thing you can do is just ask. Seriously. Remember, about a quarter of patients using these things won't volunteer the information. A simple, totally non-judgmental question when you're taking a med history: hey, are you taking any vitamins, herbs, or any other kind of supplements? That's all it takes to open the door.
And once they tell you what they're taking, you can use this super simple 3-step mental checklist. First, assess the evidence. Is there any real proof this thing is safe or effective? Second, inform your patient. Talk to them about what we know and, just as important, what we don't know. And finally, if there's clear evidence of harm or that it just plain doesn't work, you have to respectfully discourage them from using it.
And please be especially cautious with these groups. Anyone who is pregnant or nursing, the safety data just isn't there, so they should avoid them. Same goes for kids. You want to be extra careful with older adults who are already on a bunch of medications because the risk of interactions goes way up. And this is a big one. Any patient scheduled for surgery needs to stop all supplements at least 2 weeks beforehand to avoid issues with bleeding or anesthesia.
So, we'll end on this. It's a question for you to take into your very next clinic day. Knowing everything we just talked about, the next time a patient tells you about a new supplement they're trying, what's the first question that's going to pop into your head? Thinking about that is your first step to keeping them safe in this really complicated, wild west of a field.